If you're thinking of keeping large animals on a small piece of land, you like saving money, and keeping your animals healthy and happy is the top priority, then rotational grazing might be the perfect option for you. Alyssa and I set up our small acreage rotational grazing system about 4 months ago. And when we published that video, I said that I would post a review of how our system was working after we'd used it for a while. Well, I screwed up and our system hasn't worked quite as well as I pictured. So this video definitely isn't going to be a glorious review of how smart I am, and honestly, it's a little bit embarrassing because I made a rookie mistake. But I still want to take a minute to share our experience, and hopefully you can learn from my mistakes and learn how to create the most efficient setup for your small acreage farm. For simplicity's sake, I'm going to break this video into 3 sections. First, I want to talk about the basics of rotational grazing. Second, we'll dive into the specifics of our setup here in Idaho. And third, I want to talk about the top 3 rotational grazing mistakes. So before I jump into the basics of rotational grazing, I want to clarify something really quickly. In this video, I'm specifically talking about horses and mules because that's what Alyssa and I own. But the same principles will hold true whether you have cows, sheep, goats, pigs, or any other kind of grazing animal. All right, let's dive into pasture grazing 101. In general, you're going to need roughly 3 acres per horse if you want them to be out all the time without overgrazing your pasture. But if you're like us, you might not have this much space. This is where rotational grazing comes into play. With more intensive grazing management, you can keep more horses on fewer acres and still have great healthy pastures. To sum it up, rotational grazing involves moving a group of horses between several pastures on a regular basis. Once a pasture is grazed, it's given time to rest and regrow while the horses graze different pastures. Now, the most important part of this whole system is the recovery period. The recovery period gives the grass time to regrow without being grazed. This means that the pasture needs to be left empty for at least a couple weeks at a time. Now, the ultimate rotational grazing system utilizes a dry lot. Some people call dry lots sacrifice areas, but we go with dry lot. It just sounds a little nicer. Now, in the optimal situation, that dry lot's going to be connected to at least 4 pastures. The dry lot contains shelter and water, and the horses will always have access to it regardless of what pasture they're utilizing. Now, the first step to utilize a rotational grazing system would be to walk your pasture and see if they're ready to be grazed. The pasture should have at least 6 inches of grass before grazing, and a good way to remember how to manage your pasture is the take half, leave half rule. Now, the take half, leave half rule means you let your grass get at least 6 inches tall, you graze it down to 3 inches, then you allow the pasture to rest and regrow while the horses are in the following pastures. Then you just repeat the process. If you have 4 pastures and you can graze each pasture for at least 5 to 7 days, that'll allow 2 to 3 weeks of recovery for each pasture following the grazing process. Now let's dive into the specifics of our setup. One thing that Alyssa and I are super passionate about is just being good stewards of the land that we're blessed enough to own. So we live here in Idaho. We live at 5,000 feet and we're blessed to own 2.5 acres. We currently have 5 equines. And after building our dry lot, we were left with 1.3 acres of irrigated pasture. The rest of our property consists of our home, outbuildings, lawn, a garden, and a small round corral for working with our youngsters. With our setup, we have 4 pastures connected to our dry lot, and each of them are about 1/3 of an acre. We intentionally set up our dry lot with gates heading into each of the 4 pastures for sake of simplicity, and we keep Tartar equine hay baskets, some salt blocks, and a 220-gallon galvanized tank in our dry lot year-round. The hay baskets are especially important in our specific situation because we do have to feed supplemental hay even when we're utilizing our rotational grazing system. Squirrel, come on. You want to talk to the people? Come on up. Come on up. Good boy. So following a little trial and error, we did learn that we can turn out our herd for an hour or 2 a day for about 5 to 7 days before needing to rotate to the next pasture. Now this allows each pasture to recover for 15 to 21 days before it comes up in rotation again. You want to get down? Here, good boy. Good boy. Now, the reason there's such a big variance in the time on pasture and the days in each pasture is due to varying growing conditions. Here in Idaho, our pasture grew super fast in the spring and early summer, and it has been slowing down as summer has progressed into the fall. Now, obviously, we wish we had more land, and I feel like someday we will have more land, but for now, we're just thankful for the ability to turn our herd out and let them walk around and graze naturally for at least a little bit every day. And it's actually super nice because even though we only have 1.3 acres of pasture and 5 equines, our pasture has held up extremely well. It's still green, it's October right now, and it looks extremely nice still. So now, on to the embarrassing part. I want to share 3 big mistakes when it comes to rotational grazing. Thankfully, I didn't make all these mistakes, but I did make one of them, and it has cost us a lot of time where we were unable to use our pastures. So first, let's jump into mistake number 3, which is watering your pasture right before you turn your horses out. Now, this isn't a huge deal, but watering your pasture immediately before turning your animals out will cause unnecessary damage to the grass and to the ground. Horses are notoriously hard on pasture, and when the ground's soft, their hooves can leave severe scuffs, divots, and bare areas. Now, these scuffed up, disturbed areas do take longer to regrow in the best case, and in the worst case, they can be taken over by weeds. I apologize for all the racket in the background. Alyssa's goose is all fired up over here. I'm not really sure why. Now let's move on to the most hazardous mistake. That's mistake number 2, and that is abruptly turning your animals out in the springtime. After a long winter of eating dry hay, it's actually super exciting to get your mules or horses out to eat some fresh green grass, but it is important to do it slowly and gradually. I hope these ducks aren't ruining the audio. Wrangle them ducks, babe, wrangle them. Thank you. I might have to redo some of this, but we'll see. It adds to the ambiance, I think. It's that doggone goose. He gets them all riled up, or she. Noisy suckers. Yeah, who did that anyway? Love you. The green spring grass is full of sugars, and it can cause equines to founder or colic if they don't have time to adjust to the new diet. We like to start by just turning our herd out for about 10 minutes initially and work up by a couple minutes a day until they're ready for that full 2 hours of pasture time per day. This gradual adjustment allows their gut time to adjust to the new food source without causing any negative side effects. Now let's move on to the number 1 mistake related to rotational grazing. This is the one I made, and that is overgrazing your pastures. As the summer rolled on, I was just super excited to let our mules out on pasture, and I wanted to let them stay out as long as possible. So I ended up letting them graze our pasture down below that 3-inch recommended minimum grass height. Being a rookie to all this, I thought, oh, that's no big deal. It'll grow right back. But I was wrong. When you graze a pasture below that 3-inch minimum, the grasses don't have enough surface area collecting sunlight to effectively complete the growth process. And we had to give our pastures a full month of recovery to let them get back to the appropriate grazing length. So our poor mules were just in here in the dry lot as the green grass was growing out there, and we had to keep them off it, feed hay. I felt bad, and but live and learn. Next year, I won't make that same mistake. I kind of learned 2 hours is the max for our setup on any pasture for a day. So if you're interested in keeping large animals on small acreage, I would definitely recommend looking into some sort of rotational grazing system. It's worth the effort to set it up. It'll save you a few bucks in feed costs, and most importantly, it'll help keep your herd healthy and happy, even if you don't own a lot of land yet.